To solve this polynomial inequality, we factor the polynomial into irreducible factors and find all the zeros of the polynomial. Then we find the intervals determined by the real zeros of the polynomial. And what they mean by that is, if you look at this number line, this is a number line, and they're located -8, 0, and 1. Because if you look at this given polynomial, and x equals 0 is a 0, x equals -8 is a 0, and x equals 1 is a 0. So the number line has taken those 3 points in. And the first interval that I'm looking at is from -infinity to -8. The second interval is from -8 to 0, and the third interval is from 0 to 1, and the fourth interval is from 1 to infinity. Sorry. So that's what they mean by find the intervals determined by the real zeros, and use the test point in each interval to find the sign of the polynomial on that interval. Okay, so the polynomial is given to you as x times x plus 1 times x minus 1. And they say this polynomial should be greater than or equal to 0. So x times x plus 8 times x minus 1 is greater than or equal to 0. One of the advantage in this problem is it's already in factored form. So I have less work, so do not combine them together, already in factored form. So in order to find this -8, 0, and 1, I just have to set this equal to 0 and just find my 3 zeros, which I already did here. X equals 0, x equals -8, and x equals 1. Then you take this number line, you divide the number line at wherever you have the zeros are, place them, and then break them down into the intervals from -infinity to 8. Now, because this inequality is greater than or equal to 0, I can include these values. So if I rewrite it again, it's going to be -infinity to -8, but -8 can be included. Then the next interval is -8 to 0 can be included, then 0 to 1, and then from 1 to positive infinity, where infinities are not included. Okay, so the next step would be to check in these intervals where if the function of the graph is above the x-axis. So when I graph this polynomial, p of x is along the y-axis, x is along the x-axis, right? So the graph, the portion of the graph, let me draw it down here so it'll be easy. So the portion of the graph that's above the x-axis is what I'm looking for. So if you want, you can just look at the graph in the calculator. So I'm going to graph it. So just so that you can see how the graph looks. So x times x plus 8 x minus 1. Okay, keep my viewing window standard and hit graph. So to change my window to standard, so standard. Okay. So again, I'm not seeing the complete graph, so let me change my upper screen, like maximum probably to 50, and see how it goes. Still not able to see it. Maximum to 100, minimum to -100, so it will be evened out. Okay, that's better. So what I'm seeing, the polynomial is in a scale in my x minimum from -10 to 10, and this I have a -100 to 100 is what I have. So I'm seeing the graph is coming like that. approximately. So because this function is greater than or equal to 0, the portion of the graph that's above the x-axis, which means this value and this value. Now if you zoom in a little bit over here, there's a small portion of the graph that is below the x-axis. If I want to see it clearly, let me zoom just there so you can see it. So this little piece that you see down needs to be excluded from this graph. Okay, so how do I do this? So if if I'm doing it, I will take this x value, whatever this point is, which I am thinking it's -8, right? So whatever this point is, up to this point, and then I'll give a little gap because there's a portion that's below the x-axis, and then from all the way from there up to infinity. Okay, why? Because it's greater than or equal to. Now if I have to do this by hand without the help of calculator, then I will have to go with the table that they have shown, which is much easier to do also. So what they did first is they took all the factors and wrote it on the column. So x is a factor, x plus 8 is a factor, x minus 1 is a factor, and you're dealing with the signs individually, and then everything is multiplied. So what we do is we are going to look from top to bottom. So first let me start here. If I pick a test point of say -9 on this region, it's a negative number. So I know automatically my x will be a negative number. So if I put a -9 plus 8, it's going to be a negative number. If I put a -9 minus 1, this is going to be a negative number. So since I have 3 negatives, when I multiply all 3, I'm going to have another negative. So this is telling me from -8 to -infinity to -8. So in this interval, the graph is below the x-axis. So which means I don't need that in the answer for this part of the question. Okay, repeat the same process. Pick a test point between these two. I'm going to pick -1. So if I pick -1, let me use another color. So we'll have, okay, -1. So if I take -1, this will be a -1, which is negative. -1 plus 8. So 8 minus 1, right? It's positive. And this is -1 minus 1, which is negative. Now if I multiply these 3 together, I will have a positive answer. So that is telling me that in this interval, my graph is going to be above the x-axis, so that needs to be included in my final answer. Okay. So again, going to the next piece, repeat the same process. Again, I'll use the same red color. So again, first I'm going to pick 0 and 1. So I'm going to pick like say 0.5 or half. Again, it's 0.5. So this should be positive number. I'm adding 2 positive numbers. So this must be positive. Adding a positive 5 minus 1. So 1 is bigger. So this will be a negative. And therefore this has to be a negative. So this is telling me that this portion cannot be because it's below the x-axis. So this is also below the x-axis. Okay. Repeat the same process for the rightmost interval. I'm going to pick like a 2. So 2, this will be positive. This would be positive. This would be positive again because 2 minus 1 is 1, right? Positive. So therefore this should be positive, which is telling me that this should be in the answer too. So the final answer to this question is, whatever that goes here, needs to be from -8 to 0 union 1 comma infinity parentheses. So this will be the final answer to this question, which I could have done just by looking at the graph too. I can say that this was a -8. This point was my, 0. So actually my graph didn't go good. So let me redraw this thing. So the graph was something like this, right? So that was my 0. This was my 1. So this portion is below. So my final, because this is the piece that's above the x-axis, my answer is from -8 comma 0 union 1 comma infinity. You can do these problems just with the help of calculator too.